Welcome to Crime 411. Today I am discussing a case regarding Sandra Melgar, who is currently serving a 27-year prison sentence in the murder of her husband, Jim Melgar. There's a picture of them right there. Just a little bit of a backstory here. Jim and Sandra were high school sweethearts, and shortly after high school, I think a year after high school, they got married. They had one daughter together named Elizabeth. And from what everyone around them could tell, they had a very healthy, happy marriage. The evening of their 32nd wedding anniversary celebration, Jim Melgar was murdered, and officers say that Sandra is the one who murdered him and then staged a home invasion. But a lot of people don't believe that Sandra is guilty. And after doing my research on this case, I have to say I am one of them. So let me give you a little details here about the evening of the murder. So again, this goes back to December of 2012, and Sandra and Jim had decided they were going to go out for dinner for their anniversary, and they were going to go to their favorite Mexican restaurant, which they did. They left that restaurant at 9 o'clock at night, and on the way home, they stopped at a CVS to get Sprite and Coke for drink mixers. Sandra says Jim ran into the store. She waited in the car, and on the way home, she noticed that someone in a vehicle seemed to be following them. But at some point, that vehicle turned off, and so she didn't really think much about it. And so they get home sometime probably between 9:30 and 10, and they decide that they're going to go ahead and go in the jacuzzi. So they get out some strawberries and whipped cream, they make some mixed drinks, and they hop in the jacuzzi. And at around midnight, she says that her four dogs started barking. So Jim went to let the dogs in, and he had been out there for a little bit. So she decided she was going to get out and get dressed. And so she got out of the jacuzzi and went into her walk-in closet so that she could, put lotion on and get clothes on or what have you. And she says that's the last thing that she remembers. So why are officers and law enforcement saying that she staged a home invasion? Let me get to the second part of the night. So at some point in the evening, obviously, Jim Melgar was murdered. No one knew this until the next day. Family had come over. They were coming over for dinner, which Sandra and Jim had invited them, for dinner the next day, December 23rd. So around 4:30 in the afternoon the next day, the family came over, and they noticed that one of the garage doors was open, which was unusual for them. And Sandra said that the only time they really left the garage door open is if Jim was working in the yard outside. But for whatever reason, the garage door was open. No one was answering the door. No one was answering the phone. So clearly the family thought, something doesn't make sense here. Something feels off. So Herman, Jim Melgar's brother, and this is an important detail, and you'll understand why, a little bit later, but Herman said he went into the house through the garage because the door was open, and he unlocked the door and let the rest of the family in. And he remembers his daughter saying something doesn't feel right. And at that point, they heard Sandra yelling for help. So they went into the bedroom, and that is when they found Sandra tied up. She had her hands tied behind her back. Her feet were tied together. And she was in a closet, in her walk-in closet, with a chair outside the closet underneath the doorknob. So clearly they go to let her, to untie her, and the ties were so tight that she was tied up with a scarf, and it was so tight that they had to go and get scissors to cut her out of that because they couldn't loosen it. It was that tight. 30 feet away in the other closet, they find Jim Melgar, her husband, and he had been stabbed over 30 times and beaten. He was in the closet naked. and he obviously was deceased. And the family, obviously, I mean, you see something like that. I can't even imagine that, but they ran out. They called 911. Paramedics arrived 15 minutes later at 4:45, and at 4:47, Jim Melgar was pronounced deceased. So what happened is this is the question everybody has. Well, law enforcement, for whatever reason, decided that it was their belief that Sandra had murdered her husband and staged a home invasion, tied herself up, and locked herself in the closet with a chair outside the closet underneath a doorknob, which sounds pretty crazy to most people, right? I mean, that would be really difficult to do. But there are more details that are very relevant. For one, Jim, when he was found, had obvious signs of a very violent physical altercation where he clearly had tried to defend himself. He had defensive wounds, many defensive wounds that were found on his body. And he also had a broken, the bone around his eye was broken. He had been clearly in a violent struggle. Sandra, when she was found, had no blood on her, no scratches, no signs of a struggle, no sign of any sort of violent physical altercation. And that in and of itself raises a lot of questions, because clearly if somebody was murdered and you're the murderer, you would think there would be some sort of physical evidence on your body, and Sandra didn't have any. Now, the knife, it was a kitchen knife that was used to stab her husband, was found in the water in the jacuzzi that they had been in earlier that evening with a white blouse. From what I understand, the blouse also didn't have any blood on it or anything. There was nothing on it. So a lot of people have questions about that. Now, also interesting to know is that Sandra is, she's a very small woman, but she has lupus. She's had hip replacements. She has medical problems. She walks with a cane. She had seizures, epilepsy, to the point that she was very afraid of even driving because she was afraid that she might have a seizure. And so she really relied on her husband a lot, for physical things like that. And, she was a very small woman. So a lot of people are saying, how could this woman, this tiny woman who had these medical problems and had the need to walk with a cane, beat and stab her husband to death? He was stabbed over 30 times without any signs of a physical struggle, yet he's covered in wounds showing that he tried to fight back. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. So there were a lot of questions about that. Now, there are some other really interesting details for this case also. There was DNA found in the home, both male and female DNA, that did not belong to anyone in the Melgar family. There was a bloody fingerprint on the handle of the safe that was in the closet where Jim was murdered. There was no forensic testing done on that at all. Regardless of how many times the family and the defense team asked for that to be processed, they didn't do anything with it. So again, it seems like to a lot of people are of the opinion that law enforcement got this story in their head that Sandra, murdered her husband and staged a home invasion, and they just were not willing to look at anything else outside of that. There was a neighbor who reported some man that had been at the scene when police arrived who was acting suspiciously, and officers disregarded the tip. They didn't do anything with that. There had apparently been a very similar incident not very far away from the Melgars, and so that would be reason enough to think there might have been someone else, involved, and at least look into it. Plus, you have this DNA, in the home that doesn't belong to anybody that was there. So clearly, someone else was in the home. Officers said that when they came, the house was ransacked and that it looked like it was staged, and that nothing of value had been taken. But Elizabeth, Sandra and Jim's daughter, says that's not true. She said she gave law enforcement a list of things that had been taken, including prescription medication for opiates, and they didn't follow up with that either. So it seems that law enforcement really did not want to entertain the idea of anything happening outside of the theory that they had come up with, which was that Sandra had murdered her husband and staged a home invasion. Now, the prosecution showed the jury how they had somebody actually in there who tied their hands behind their own back to show how Sandra could have done that. They also said that they believe that she was able to get the chair underneath the doorknob by using a pillow sham to wiggle the chair underneath the door to get it up to the door and underneath the handle, which, I mean, a lot of times people use the term reaching, so I'm going to use it here. To me, that's really reaching. That seems like a very far-fetched thing. And interestingly enough, there was actually no pillow sham found near the chair when officers were on the scene. So not sure where that theory came from, but again, no physical evidence to back up the theory that she did that. So a lot of questions here, a lot of questions. And family members, including Jim's family, do not believe that Sandra murdered her husband. They say they do not believe she's guilty, and she maintains her innocence. Some other interesting facts that are troublesome to me: the lead detective, sheriff in the case, was actually fired not for anything related to this case, but for fraudulently signing search warrants in other cases. And so he was fired, he was terminated. And when he was terminated and they were going through his office, they found a drawer in one of the file cabinets that was filled with evidence, documentation, all kinds of things related to the Melgar case that had been completely ignored. None of it had been processed or anything. It was just sitting in a drawer the whole time, completely disregarded. So that's troublesome. With these pieces of information, I'm having a hard time understanding how her recent request for an appeal was denied. But I have to read more about that. I don't understand how that process works or what they were asking for an appeal for, but I'm going to look into that, and I will follow up with another video on that. But for now, I just really wanted to give you guys the details of the case and a background here. So some people had argued that the Melgars were Jehovah's Witness, and they follow a very strict set of rules, and especially, one of those rules in regard to divorce. According to the Jehovah's Witness religion, from what people have argued, is that if Sandra had been, unhappy in her marriage and requested that they get a divorce, that she would have been shunned by the community and what have you. But again, everything points to a happy marriage, and her daughter says that her parents were very, very happy. And of course, like every other couple, they had arguments here and there, but nothing that stood out to her as, that would be concerning about their marriage. She said her parents had been together for 32 years since high school, and they loved each other very much. So lots of questions. Again, I gotta say, and here's an interesting thing. So officers said that there was no signs of a break-in. And this is why I said earlier that it was a very important detail that Herman, Jim's brother, when he arrived the next day, was able to just walk right into the house and unlock the door to let the rest of the family in because the garage door was open, right? So do you really need signs of someone breaking in to say that somebody had been in the home? I mean, the door was open. You just walk in, right? Plus, you've got DNA, both male and female DNA in the home that didn't belong to anybody in their family. So there's that. The other thing is that, according to Sandra, Jim had gone back to let the dogs inside, but they started barking. Who's to say he didn't open the door to let the dogs in and somebody followed him in the house? And everything that transpired, and then they left through the garage door, right? So just because there's no signs of a break-in doesn't mean that somebody didn't go in the house. So there's questions about that. Again, I have to research more about how certain things work because I'm not a lawyer, but I'm confused as to how you can find a drawer full of evidence that had been completely ignored. You have no physical evidence at all linking this woman to the murder of her husband. Zero physical evidence. She was prosecuted strictly on circumstantial evidence alone. Yet you have physical evidence that someone else was in the home because you have that DNA, you have a fingerprint, a bloody fingerprint. You have a sheriff's office who completely ignored and disregarded an entire drawer full of information regarding the case. I'm not understanding how this wasn't declared a mistrial. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm gonna reach into the details of that and see what I can find out, and I will follow up with another video. But to me, that was really strange. But Sandra, again, she maintains her innocence. She says that the jury got it wrong, and in this case, I would have to agree with that. And even if the jury is right and she is guilty, which I just don't believe that she is, but if she is guilty, you have to say guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt. There's DNA in the home that belonged to other people. Reasonable doubt. She's found with no blood on her, no cuts, no scratches, no signs of a physical altercation, nothing. Reasonable doubt. They checked to see if there were signs of her trying to clean up blood. You know how they look through, pipes and things like that? Nothing. It's not like she took a shower and washed the blood off her and got dressed and went in the closet, because there was nothing found to show that she had tried to clean anything at all. So reasonable doubt, lots of reasonable doubt here, right? Very interesting case. There are a lot of people who are adamant that she was wrongfully accused, wrongfully convicted. And I would, again, like I said, I would have to agree with that. So I will follow up. I'm going to do another video with more case details. I'm going to do more research on this myself. I'm very interested to learn more about this now that I've dug into it as far as I have. But I am definitely interested to know what your thoughts are on this. Do you think Sandra Melgar staged a home invasion? Now, another detail you may be interested to know, there was her purse had been dumped out on the bed. Officers said because her credit card hadn't been taken that it was staged. But prescription medication was taken. It could have been some drug addict came in and just wanted pills. Who knows? We don't know because they didn't investigate anything outside of the idea that Sandra had done this. Once they got it in their heads that she had done this, that was it. They just were not willing to look at anything else. So what are your thoughts? I'm curious to know. Please follow Crime 411 on YouTube, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can follow us there. But I will do another video later this week as I learn more about the case and more about the legalities behind, again, like I said, how this couldn't have been declared a mistrial, why her appeal was denied, and I will follow up with you on that. But thank you for tuning in. Very interesting, controversial case. Sandra Melgar. Again, you're listening to Crime 411. We appreciate you, and we will follow up with this story again later.